Mm. All right. Well, it looks like we are live. Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Best Practices for Culturally Appropriate Conversations About Food, presented by Breana Killeen. My name is Beth Stark. I'm a registered dietitian nutritionist and the director of nutrition outreach with Northeast Beef Promotion Initiative, a small but mighty team housed within the Pennsylvania Beef Council that works on behalf of beef farmers and ranchers to develop and execute programming through the beef checkoff in the heavily populated Northeast region of the country. In addition to today's webinar, we'll be hosting two more webinars throughout the rest of this year, one in May and one in August. So watch for some information to come on our May event, including a link to register in our post-webinar communications that you'll receive later today. Now, a few quick housekeeping items before I pass to our presenter. Today's webinar is being hosted via Zoom webinar where your camera and microphone are disabled for an optimized viewing experience. The live chat will be enabled for our webinar for interactivity, but we do ask that questions be submitted using the Q&A button that appears at the bottom of your Zoom window. We're all familiar with Zoom here, right? We will hold that Q&A portion until the end of the webinar and tackle as many of those wonderful questions as we can. Of course, we are a webinar, and as noted, the follow-up email communication you will receive later today will include the following: a link to this webinar recording, a post-webinar survey link that we really hope you will complete for us, the CEU certificate for approval of 1 credit from the CDR, and registration link for the webinar again that's coming up on May 22nd. Please note that these slides are not available for sharing. I know that's a common question, but these slides are not available for sharing. And let's just kind of continue on to this main event. I am so pleased to introduce today's fabulous presenter, Breana Killeen. She is a food writer, recipe developer, culinary nutritionist, and farmer with 15 plus years of experience creating editorial and digital content. She has written and edited over 3,000 recipes, articles, and presentations for top brands, including Eating Well, All Recipes, Food and Wine, Cabot Creamery, HelloFresh, Palm Wonderful, and National Beef Council, as well as the Dairy Council. Breana has a master's degree in public health from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill and is a graduate of the Le Cordon Bleu, London, a wine and spirit education trust sommelier, and a registered dietitian, of course. Now, when she's not cooking or chasing her toddlers, twin toddlers, I might add, you can find her out on Killeen Crossroads Farm in Vermont, where she's wrangling 200 chickens, 10 cows, 2 dogs, and of course, her tractor-loving husband. Oh my goodness, what an awesome background and bio there you have, Breana. Again, it's just such a pleasure to have you here today. So I'm going to turn it over to you to take it away.
Thank you so much, Beth. I'm really grateful to be here. Honestly, I love that we can do these presentations over Zoom. You've mentioned already earlier, I'm based in Vermont. It is currently, it was 16 degrees when I went for a walk this morning. So definitely a little bit of a fun venture, but you know what? Our cows are still warm. Our chickens, everybody always asks if the chickens get cold. They don't, they like puff up. They've got all this air under them. They're quite hysterical. But this presentation is one that really, truly is close to my heart. It actually all came about almost 4 years ago when I gave a presentation alongside 4 other Asian dietitians. And we gave a presentation that was called Beyond the Soy Sauce. And essentially how we are all considered Asian. However, we are very different in different parts of Asia. And we had a dietitian from the Middle East, one from India, one from Vietnam, and one from mainland China. And how we are all Asian. But when we think of Asian, we think of Southeast Asian. And this presentation has kind of just tumbled from that. And it kind of is one of those, like, there was a big awakening in the food world. How do we continue to have these culturally appropriate conversations about food? How do we build rapport with people? And how do we do it respectfully? So I'm going to be talking a lot today. You guys heard my bio. This is me when I actually have lots of makeup on and am shooting video. But I'm a culinary dietitian. I'm a chef. I started in restaurants before actually getting my degree in nutrition because I really love working in restaurants. I'm a mom. I actually have 4 kids. The youngest 2 are the twins. They're almost 3-year-old toddlers. Oh my gosh, is that a thing as well? And then, like you heard, I'm a farmer. Because we are over Zoom, I would love it if you could drop into the chat where you're from, a little bit about you, what type, if you work in the nutrition world, if you work in the food world, if you work in marketing, if you, just a little bit about you, since I can't see any of your faces, which always makes this kind of awkward, and just to know, where you're coming from. And the last thing that I would love to know too is, one of your, if you would love to share your favorite food, we will be actually using some of those favorite foods later. But I'm already seeing, we have a UVM alumni. My husband works as a professor at the university here. New York, Pennsylvania, Alabama. I'm originally from North Carolina. I see somebody else is from North Carolina. So please drop that in there. Would love to know who you are. So what are we going to talk about today? Well, we're going to talk about what I call the reckoning. And the reckoning is really in the food media world when all of this came to a head. And I was working at EatingWell Magazine at the time, which is a part of a larger company called, at that time, Meredith. Now it's Meredith. So it was Food and Wine, Better Homes and Gardens, Southern Living. All of us were all of a sudden in a room going, wait a minute, we have a problem here about the way that we portray food and the way we talk about food. And at Eating Well, that also relates to nutrition. How are we talking about it there? We're going to talk about cultural appropriation. We're going to talk about words that we avoid now, especially when it comes to food media, and words that we use cautiously. I'm going to talk about recipe titles and recipe names and head notes. And then we're going to go into rapport with clients from other cultures and a little bit on food holidays. So this is what I aptly call the reckoning. So this was a soup that was originally listed as soup jumeau. It was the original recipe title listed by Bon Appetit, December 21st of 2020. And the backlash on this was, it was swift. Does anyone know the cultural significance of soup jumeau? So soup jumeau is a Haitian soup that is eaten on January 1st. It coincides with the New Year, but it also coincides with Independence Day for Haitians from their French colonizers in 1804. It symbolizes freedom, as it was forbidden for them to eat it. It was seen as a food that was too good for them, even though it was theirs. And it was something that they weren't supposed to eat during their enslavement. It was seen as a delicacy. Well, the recipe that was posted looked nothing like, and not just looked, you always have to have a photo, and really a beautiful photo to go with your recipe, but it looked nothing like a traditional soup jumeau. Almost everything was changed. The ingredients, the seasonings, the techniques, they were all adapted to conform to the primarily white fan base of Bon Appetit. This soup looks like it's pureed. It has a chili nutmeg oil. It has candied spice nuts. And really none of this looks like a traditional soup jumeau. And so this is just one of the quotes that was listed underneath it. I want to show you a picture of a traditional soup jumeau. This is one, as you can see, that looks nothing like the beautiful, don't get me wrong, beautiful photo that is right here. And I'm sure the delicious soup that they posted, this is what a traditional version looks like. Also looks equally delicious. It looks like something you would want to dig into on a cold day. The traditional ingredients, however, that we're missing are beef, potatoes, carrots, cabbage, celery, leek, turnips, Scotch bonnet peppers, and pasta, in particular rigatoni. And then we had non-traditional ingredients that were added: coconut milk, Berber, maple syrup. We use maple syrup instead of honey when we want to keep something vegan, which was a big top search term at the time. Almonds, nutmeg, allspice, cinnamon. What we have here is an entirely different soup. One that you almost could say isn't even close to the original soup. Well, what happened? The editor-in-chief was fired along with a lot of other people around them. They issued an apology, which also acted to update the head note and describe what this soup now is. But the most important thing is that the name of the soup was changed. And so they say, we've updated the name and the byline. The byline is, the recipe writer of this dish. We've changed the head note to match the excerpted recipe. And we apologize for misrepresenting this recipe. And so they actually then write a very good head note that says, Haitians often commemorate Independence Day on January 1st by eating this soup, and then so on and so forth about why this is so important. Well, why are we talking about that? Well, I will tell you, when I was at EatingWell, this soup came out, and all of a sudden, along with all that backlash, we swung the complete opposite way, and we said, wait a minute, now Breana's the only person that can write any Asian recipes because she's the only one that has any kind of clout and is of that ethnicity. But that's not we can't go about, how do we figure out, yes, I'm Chinese. I'm also Jewish. Does that mean that those are the only recipes that I'm now allowed to write? I grew up in the South. I saw somebody else is from North Carolina. I grew up in North Carolina. Does that mean that because I grew up there that I can't write recipes from there because I don't look like a Southerner? Does that mean because I went to a French culinary school and I actually was trained in French cooking that I'm not allowed to do that? No. So what we're talking about today is, well, how, of somebody of one descent, how can you write a recipe if you are of a different ethnicity? If you are trying to write a cookbook, if you're trying to write handouts for somebody else, how do we do that? Well, first of all, we need to step back and we need to think about when and where do we talk about food? Well, really, it looks like there are a lot of people that are also in the food world, either dietitians or studying nutrition or work in a clinical field. If you're media focused, we work in all different aspects of food. We talk about it from growing. When I'm on the farm, we're talking about it from a farming perspective. We're talking about how do we grow it? How do we sell it? How do we get it into markets? Cooking, we talk about cooking a lot. How do we make it? What are the ingredients look like? Where do we source those ingredients? Cookbooks. What are we making for dinner? Oh my goodness. Yeah, I can't even tell you how many times, I spent my whole career writing recipes and making food, and I still can't answer the what is for dinner question that seems to always come to me. Selling, we talk about in restaurants and takeout and prepared foods. We talk about food in a lot of different places. But we have to know that when we are thinking about these cultural communications that we're having, what avenue, who are we talking to? And that's where we'll go next. Well, what do you eat? This is such a broad question, and I want to relate it to the question that I get looking as I do when people say, where are you from? I always love that question because when especially when I was growing up, the question of where am I from was a question to signify what is my ethnicity. And when I would respond with, well, I'm from North Carolina, the question was often repeated to me. No, where are you from? And I understood the question that they were trying to ask of me, right? Where are you from? I am from North Carolina. My ethnicity is I am half Chinese. And then on the other side, my mother is Jewish, but she's of Russian and Austrian descent. That was the question that somebody was trying to ask me most of the time, and oftentimes would ask me louder as if I didn't hear it the first time. That is not a best practice for culturally appropriate conversations about food or about, how do you ask somebody their ethnicity? That is the same question of what do you eat? That is such a broad question that can be answered in so many different ways. As dietitians, we know we need to be more specific. What is your favorite quick dinner on a weeknight when you are exhausted? I would love to know people's answers on this. If people hesitate, they need a minute to think about it. I'll go first, right? Okay. I love ramen. And I can't even tell you how much ramen I've eaten in my life. It's the comfort food that I go to immediately. It is what my dad used to always make when my mom would go out of town or when he and we called it the fancy ramen. Okay. So it's $3 a pack. You have to get it at, there's a Chinese grocery store that we go to. And it's $3 versus, 25 cents. But we jazz it up. We add frozen dumplings. I add vegetables. I add kimchi. I add honestly whatever is in my fridge that I can put into ramen. And then I add some chili crisp. And then I have a really cold glass of wine with it, white wine, because that is just my favorite go-to meal. And when you open that up and when you start talking about, what your favorite thing is, maybe that'll open it up for somebody else. However, I used to not tell people that my favorite comfort food was ramen because it was considered cheap and bad for you because, people would say, oh, it has MSG in it, which we all know isn't bad for you. By the way, MSG has gotten a bad rap for a long time. I know this is a separate conversation, sort of, but it relates, I promise. MSG got a bad rap in 1968 when there was an op-ed written to the New York Times about eating Chinese food and not feeling so great after it. However, in that op-ed, he said this could be contributed to either by the high quantity of sodium, number 2, by the alcohol that I drank, or maybe 3, by that MSG. What got picked up on was the MSG. And that MSG was what made everybody sick, but it was only associated with Chinese food. And it became known as the Chinese restaurant syndrome. Do you know what else has MSG? Lipton soup mix, Doritos, cream of mushroom soup, many, many, many other products that you consume or that many people consume has MSG, but people still associate it just with Chinese food. And so at that time, when I was growing up, I was the kid who had the weird lunch and was the person who my dad used to pack dumplings for me in a thermos and, the sauce separately. And I told him that story once because dumplings are still my favorite. And he said, oh my gosh, you must have forgotten that I packed whole head-on fish for you, shrimp for you, so that, you could take it out and then I'd also dip those. That was a memory apparently I had blocked being in elementary school and eating what everybody told me was my weird lunch because it smelled different or because it had heads on it. Even though my dad had made that for me. And so my point in telling all these stories is that when somebody tells you what their favorite food is, or where they like to eat it, you have to leave your judgment behind. And I know we know this in practice, but this is particularly important when we are talking to communities of color and when we are talking about culturally appropriate conversations. People are not going to open up to you. People are not going to build any kind of rapport with you. People are not going to listen to us if we tell them that their food is weird or that it smells or that it's bad for them. We have to leave that judgment behind. Whatever and your opinions, you might not like that food. That is totally fine. I used to work, I've had a lot of jobs, as you heard from Beth saying. I worked in the wine department. at this store that it had a huge, it had a cooking school in it. It had a deli. It sold housewares. It was just a huge store. It was called Southern Season. And when I went back to get my master's, my MPH, I worked in the wine department. And I remember somebody came in and they said, I am having shrimp scampi for dinner and I would like a bottle of wine. We have people coming over. I want to get something nice. And I said, okay, what would you like to get? And they said, a Cabernet or a Cab. There is no worse pairing than buttery, garlicky shrimp scampi and Cabernet. They do not go together. And I had all the training. I worked at, five-star, five-diamond restaurants. Guess what? I pointed her to. I told her first, I think that a great pairing would be a buttery Chardonnay. If you're not into buttery, buttery Chardonnays from California, which most people like. We could also go to France. We could also go to South America. And then she said, I really like Cabernet. And I said, great, let's go find you the best Cabernet that we can for the price that you would like to spend. Because guess what? I'm not eating it. That's not my pairing. That's what she wants. And so when we have that opportunity, we need to just listen and say, okay, that's what she wants. That's what we're going to go for. That is number one and paramount when we are talking to communities of color. We need to listen. What are the foods that are traditional to you? What are your comfort foods? And instead of saying, these are the wrong ones, we say, okay, let's make this the best version of that. And talk about maybe a few things that we can add to it that just bump up the fiber. So what is cultural appropriation? Well, when I was talking about that ramen example, right? I didn't used to say that ramen was my favorite food. Well, that I was the weird little girl. Recently, ramen became very, very trendy and cool. Cultural appropriation is the unacknowledged adoption of customs, practices, and ideas of one people or society, often for the dominant group's entertainment or profit, and results in the propagation of stereotypes. I know that feels like a lot of words, and it's a definition that I tried to break up in a little ways. Let me give you examples that really hone that in. So ramen. Ramen was something and is something that's been eaten for centuries in Southeast Asia. It is not a trend over there, and it's not a trend for many of us who have been eating it our whole lives. But when it became trendy, when magazines picked it up, and I worked at these magazines and still work for them these days, it became cool to then, ramen is now on trend. Oh, let's open ramen restaurants and let's make profit off of it and not think about what the traditional versions are. Or even worse, let's shit on the traditional versions and say that ours are better. Sorry, Beth, that came out of my mouth. That is, that is cultural appropriation. When you take something that is of a culture, that is something that has been enjoyed by people for a very long time, and modernize it and make it into something that then is palatable for the dominant culture and then profit off of it. You make money off of selling that ramen, but you take the stereotypes and you call it like China ramen. Guys, I was in Florida, actually just as of yesterday. I was at Animal Kingdom 2 days ago with my mother-in-law and my toddlers, which I now understand why anyone under 3 is, you don't have to pay for them, because what a disaster. But we were at a restaurant at Disney and they had a salad that was called China Island chicken salad. Everything about the day was pretty tough except for the safari. But I looked at that and I went, oh my goodness, this still, I'm looking around going, has anybody noticed this says China Island? What is China Island? And what do you think was in that chicken salad? We'll get there. I'm going to give you another example of cultural appropriation. Has anybody ever had congee? We call it joke. It's a rice porridge that essentially is, usually you cook rice in a 1-to-2 ratio, 1 cup to 2 cups rice. I'm sorry, 2 cups water. When you make congee, it's like a porridge. It's a rice porridge. It is basically taking 1 cup of rice and cooking it in like 10 cups of water. The consistency is like rice soup. You cook it for a long time. My dad makes a version that I think is quite boring. All he does is put like a little bit of ginger in, maybe, 1 piece. That's it. I love to make it, I put all kinds of shrimp and chicken and Chinese sausage and really just boost it up. This, and I'm not using names because names really aren't important here. But there was a woman in Portland who dubbed herself the congee queen. And she wrote a post and she said, I spent a lot of time modernizing congee, modernizing it for the Western palate, making a congee that you can eat and find delicious and doesn't seem foreign, because God forbid it's foreign. Referred to her then reimagined congee as a gourmet foodie version of this traditional congee, which is kind of this weird thing. She then started selling $15 breakfast cure kits that looked just like this. They had hazelnuts and blueberries and I don't know what that is. That's not congee. She then continued, even after being called out, she apologized, but continued to sell her version, her $15 breakfast cure. This is a picture of what it traditionally more looks like. She continued to sell her version and profit off of it. That is cultural appropriation. So we're going to move into words to avoid and words that I like to say to use cautiously. And then we're going to go a little more into, okay, well then how do we talk about things in a way that doesn't push people away? Well, first of all, let's talk about what are the words that we're going to avoid. Number 1, and I really should switch these up. Number 1 is the word weird. A food might be different than what you are traditionally used to eating. That doesn't make it weird. It just makes it different. It makes it something that you might not eat. Cabernet with shrimp scampi. Do I think that's weird? No. Would I choose it? No. But that's what she likes to drink. Great. It's not weird. It's just different. Exotic is a white centering term that is essentially, oh, it's from a foreign land. If it's exotic, it means it's essentially non-white. So think about it, how you use that term. Exotic can be used, obviously, there is a way to use exotic. When you're talking about food, think about the context of how you're using it. Oriental usually, well, actually just traditionally means of the Orient. However, when it was used and when it really came into presence is in the 20s, when they were talking about people of the Orient and really the stereotypes associated with it. Kaffir lime. Kaffir is actually a term that essentially is the same as saying the N-word in South Africa. It was dubbed that it was dubbed that because the people who were picking those limes were slaves. So we now say Macroot lime. Manly and girly. I just want to say, can men not drink pink drinks? And can women not grill? Why are we associating gender with food as well? I think we're allowed to do everything. White trash. If we are going to talk about communities of color, let's talk about those not of color as well. And I just think that Personally, why are we even using that in the first place? And then we are dietitians. And this is my time where I get to say, let's stop assigning guilt and conditions that are often associated with addiction or with mental health issues. Let's stop using those around food. Why should we feel guilty to eat anything? Yes, there are foods that we should eat more of and foods that we should eat less of. But if any one of you says they don't like Doritos, I don't believe you. And you know what? We might not eat them all the time, but we shouldn't feel guilty when we do that, nor should we make anyone else feel guilty when doing that. So when you see sinful or skinny or binge-worthy put into recipe names or recipe titles, that is automatically signifying to somebody that they should feel bad about eating whatever it is. And we as dietitians know better. We should not be, there are no good foods, there are no bad foods. There are just foods we should eat more and less of. And clean. When food comes out of the ground out here on our farm, it is dirty. What is clean food otherwise? I know we all know what people are trying to say when they mean clean, but that makes people think, though, again, oh, this other food is bad, and we need to stop with good and bad and any kind of words that associate with guilt. It pulls away from our message. So let's talk about words to use cautiously. Ethnic. Well, ethnic really just, if you actually look at the definition of ethnic, ethnic base is a grouping of people who identify with each other based on shared attributes that distinguish them from other groups. This can be traditions, ancestry, language, culture, or religion. But would you consider Jewish food ethnic? Yes. Would you consider Christian food ethnic? When we use the word ethnic, we need to think about how we are using it. Cheap eats, a lot of times that goes is associated with communities of color too. And when we call the food that, we often can insinuate too that we're talking about the people. All American. When you see a category of all American and all you see is burgers and fries and hot dogs. I was born in the US. I'm an American. Does that mean that the food that I eat is an American? Last year, at the end of last year, the New York Times put out a section. And if you want to see anybody that's doing things really, really right, a lot of the terms that I'm talking about when we get into recipe titles and headnotes and everything, the New York Times cooking section is nailing it. They're doing a great job. They put out an article that said the 10 best, I think it was either the 10 or the 20, but I think it was the 10 best American foods, American dishes they had this year. And there were foods from all cultures. And it was just amazing to not see American food portrayed not representing the people that call themselves Americans. Healthy. We use the word healthy a lot. I'm saying this I put this in my cautiously category because one of the things that we did at EatingWell and that I continue to try to tell people to do is, instead of leaning on the term healthy, explain why. So instead of just saying, I made healthy spaghetti, what does that mean? It doesn't mean anything for anybody if you don't describe why you did it. So instead of saying just, this is healthy spaghetti, you say, traditional versions of spaghetti use white pasta and a pound of ground beef and don't include any vegetables. In my version, in this version, we swapped whole wheat pasta because it adds, this two grams of fiber, and reduced, we added, instead of just a pound of beef, we added vegetables because, such as carrots and sweet potatoes because they add vitamin A, which helps with your helps with your eyesight. So instead of just leaning on the word healthy, it is our job to describe why and what we did. So that I just saw a question come in, and I will answer that. So it's how the spaghetti changes are not appropriation. So spaghetti changes, when you're making a change to a recipe, you can write a recipe however you want to write it. What we are talking about here is how we're not saying this is a traditional version when it's made here. When you're saying your version, you're not saying you made it better. In this case, you're saying this is my version and the changes that I made and what those changes result to. So let's say, with the pasta version, you go from white pasta to brown pasta to whole wheat spaghetti. And you say then we add fiber because fiber is good for helping things move along, because we all don't get the recommended amount of fiber. So my point here is that instead of just leaning on the word healthy, we have a chance to educate people and say, this is how we make things healthier, so that they in the future can think, oh, maybe I will switch this because it adds fiber, because fiber is good for me for this reason. This was another, this is my last example, and then we're going to go into recipe titles themselves. This was a restaurant that was opened by, it was called Lucky Lee's in Manhattan in New York City. That was on the premise of clean Chinese. That was dairy-free, which, by the way, is majority of dairy-free. And how soy-free, gluten-free, I'd say joy-free, but how it was advertised that this food is now clean. And the uproar that came from it was essentially saying, wait a minute, you are completely demonizing all the food of the traditional foods, the authentic foods, when, by the way, Chinese American is very different than the traditional Chinese food. But by saying that the food needed to be cleaned up, you're insinuating too that the people need to as well. So I'm really glad, by the way, that you're using the chat box. Again, this is a very difficult, I actually find this a very difficult presentation to always do over Zoom, because I can't, understand, I'm seeing questions come up, and I'm going to answer all these questions at the end, I promise. I would love it, and I'll go first. A food that you like, that you are embarrassed that you like, or that you've been made fun of for liking. And be honest here, because this is important. All right. Already I'm seeing gefilte fish, bologna. I love bologna. Hot dogs, Velveeta, tofu, liver and onions, pig's feet. Mine is tripe. There's a Chinese tripe stew that I have loved since I was a kid. My dad and I used to go to the one Chinese restaurant in Durham that was literally called Hong Kong Restaurant. My dad's from Hong Kong, and we would go get dim sum. And one of the dishes we always got was tripe, which is cow stomach, and it's in this stew. It's freaking delicious. And I remember I'd bring friends, and, they'd say, oh, I want to come to Dim's, whatever you guys are going. I want to eat dumplings. And of course, dumplings. Who doesn't like a dumpling? Well, I remember being embarrassed to order that tripe stew because it was something that I was going to be told was weird. I am loving this right now. Kelly, ketchup, kettle cooked potato chips dipped in ketchup I love it. I love these because we all have those foods that we know when we tell people, people will go, ooh, oh, I don't know about that. Guess what? When we talk to communities of color and we make a face or we go, ew, gross, or, ugh, how could you do that? We have automatically lost whoever we are trying to talk to because they're going to say, no, no, there's, hey, you don't understand me. You don't understand my food. I don't believe you. You just go right there. You're gone. All foods are foods that are important for some people. We, on the farm, yeah, the beef tenderloin goes immediately when we go to sell things. We also have oxtail and tripe and tongue and all different parts. And we have actually a very, very large subset of refugees who come to our farm, particularly for all those other parts, because they are still protein. Because there are many, many other parts of the animal that, guess what, do amazing things. I appreciate now how much people are into beef fat and putting it on their faces. It's taken me a long time to be able to find sources that want to purchase. We usually sell all of our beef suet, all of our beef fat to a local soap maker. And recently people want them for face salve and face balms, all parts of the animal. When I fill out a cut sheet, we take everything because all parts are important and can be used in some way. I have a almost 15-year-old German short-haired pointer dog. About a year ago, that dog looked at me and he's like, I am done with this dry food that you keep serving me. And I have found that if I make broth with chicken feet and beef bones and stuff. So there's collagen, there's beef fat, there's all kinds of, it obviously tastes delicious. And I make it without onions because they can't have onions. And that goes on his food every single time. We do not waste a single part of the animal. It has taken me, I am almost 40. It has taken me until I was almost 40 to be able to say those things out loud and not feel like I was going to be made fun of. So what are the best practices? Well, let's talk about recipe titles. Recipe titles should be written in the language of origin with English in parentheses. I worked in print for a long time. I recognize that also with dietitians, we have handouts, and oftentimes we do not have a lot of space. On digital, online, and write as much as we want. If we're giving a handout or if we're doing something in print, I recognize that there are limitations, to how big how small you can make your text, but if you need to make it into a line. What I'm telling you right now are best practices and what the ideals are, so we can move towards that. So we write our recipe titles in the language of origin with the English in parentheses. If we deviate from a classic or an authentic version, and people ask me a lot, well, how do I know if it's classic or how do I know if it's authentic? You have to do your homework. Sometimes that means going past the second page of Google, and sometimes that means picking up a book or reaching out to somebody who is an expert and asking what a classic or authentic version is. In this case, I'm looking at a Fessenden. My husband was actually, even though is an Irish family, his dad was the headmaster of an international school in Tehran. So my very Irish Kieran Killeen husband was born in Tehran. And Fessenden was the first dish that he made for me. And it's traditionally, he made it with lamb and it has a walnut sauce. If you switch it to lentils, you make it vegan, but you change nothing else. All the rest of the ingredients are the same. You're just changing, one ingredient. You can still call it that traditional, but you identify what's different. In this case, we made a vegan version and it's lentils. If you change it completely, like we saw with the soup jumeau, If you change multiple ingredients, if you alter the method, if you add non-traditional ingredients, if you deviate far from what that original dish is, you have a different dish. In this case, we changed it to mushrooms. We changed it from walnuts to pecans. It's a different dish, and you name it accordingly. Oh, I just want to say one more thing here. The head note, which is the description that goes along with the recipe, that little description, where it says the inspiration for this mushroom stew is from my husband, who made me a Fessingen the first time that we were together. This is my version that I made with mushrooms because I can get them locally, and I didn't have any walnuts, so I made this version with pecans. That's where you can talk about it and still use that term if that's something that you need to get in. Recipe titles should not use adjectives for continents or regions such as Asian, Caribbean, African. Identify the flavors in the food itself. This goes along with not saying all Asians are the same. India is in Asia. The Middle East is in Asia. When most people think of Asian, they're thinking of Southeast Asian, Chinese, Japanese, Korean, Vietnamese. Again, not all the same. So instead of just saying Asian lettuce wraps, let's actually talk about what the ingredients are. Lettuce wraps with peanut dressing. In this case, there's noodles. You could even say sesame noodle peanut wraps. Or sesame noodle lettuce wraps with peanut dressing and pickled, looks like a little bit of pickled radish and carrot. Just describe what it is instead of just going with Asian slaw, Asian noodles, Asian dressing. That assumes that there's only one type of Asian noodle or Asian salad. If you want to, and if it's signified just because it has soy sauce in it, call it that. Call it a soy noodle salad with sesame seeds. That actually sounds a lot more interesting. And then those head notes. That is where you can talk about, where did that recipe inspiration come from? If there are lots of different Asian ingredients, for example, mirin is Japanese, fish sauce is Vietnamese, there's oyster sauce in there, which is Chinese. You grouping them all together, use Asian-inspired or Asian-style. That incorporates it all, and we'll just say, oh, okay, there are Asian ingredients, but we're not attributing it to it that it's just one type of Asian and or that there is only one type of Asian. Do your homework. Is it an authentic recipe? I described this before. And then give credit to where you found that inspiration from and to the origin of the recipe. Again, if you go onto the New York Times, you'll see now in the New York Times cooking section that it'll say a recipe by Melissa Clark, original recipe, or I'm sorry, recipe by Hong Tai Mei, and then adapted by Melissa Clark, because that's where she got her inspiration. Taking inspiration from somebody else and giving them credit makes you a better recipe writer, not one that doesn't deserve credit. All right. Did the recipe you're adapting, where did it come from? Did it come from a blogger? Then that's where you write that adapted from. I can't tell you how many recipes I've seen that I wrote for EatingWell that then came out on a blog that had no credit and changed. Everybody has the idea, oh, well, if I just change, one thing, 3 things, then it's my recipe. Just give credit. It makes you a better recipe writer. And then avoid saying you made a cultural recipe better. You made your version. Saying you made it better implies that the original wasn't good. And I'm talking about authentic recipes here, which is offensive. Just talk about your version. Why do you like it this much more? It's great because of this. Great, fabulous. You made it your version. And lastly, let's match food photography. We know that we can't have a recipe without a photo these days. This is a photo of a recipe that is actually listed as better than takeout sweet Thai basil chicken. If you can identify, there are several things that is wrong with this photo of why it's culturally inappropriate. I would love to, let's see if anybody can get it. There's 3. 101 with food photography, match the ingredients and the techniques with the photo. If you call for something as an ingredient, it should be listed in there. Yes, somebody just got the first one, chopsticks. Why? And can you identify what type of chopsticks these are? I love this game. Okay. Props. Let's use props that are authentic to the dish. The chopsticks are offensive in this dish because Thai food is not generally eaten with chopsticks unless it's a noodle dish. This is not a noodle dish. By the way, thank you. And these are Japanese chopsticks. There are different types of chopsticks. Japanese chopsticks are finer and have a point at the end. Chinese chopsticks are rounder and essentially the same width all the way through. Korean chopsticks are metal and flat. Filipino don't use chopsticks. So instead of just saying, oh, this is an Asian dish, let's throw chopsticks into the photo. Do your homework. And if you're going to add garnishes and props, don't just add something because it's pretty or it adds color. This right here is Italian basil, not Thai basil. Oh, okay. Culturally appropriate conversations about food. This is what we've been talking about. Translate to better clinical rapport. If people know that you understand what it's like to be told your food is weird or be told that your unhealthy food is bad, you automatically can talk to somebody in a different way. And so if you take home anything from what I've said today, it's just knowing that if we talk about food in a way that is acceptable in all ways, we will be able to tell somebody that maybe they were just diagnosed with type 2 diabetes and what that means. When I was doing my clinical rotation in Eastern North Carolina, I can tell you there are not a lot of people that look like me in Eastern North Carolina. We had a man come in who had stepped on a nail. He was tall, probably about 6'4" and thin. And he had stepped on that nail 3 days before and didn't know he had stepped on that nail. And his A1C was 12.6. I didn't know how he had any digits. I didn't know how he was just talking like it was just normal. And here I was, the dietitian who walked in. He was not there to see me. He was there to get the nail out of his foot. He said, why are you here? And I said, well, you have type 2 diabetes and maybe your doctor told you that, and I'm here to talk to you about that. And then we started talking, what are the things that he eats? And I said, well, what about vegetables? He goes, I bet you like Asian vegetables. And I said, I bet you like collards. And he burst out laughing because I said, I can play this game too. If you want to end, and from then on, I kept going back and talking to him. And I kept saying, if we're going to talk about this, we're going to talk about this. And we broke down that barrier. And we just said, because sometimes there's humility in it, because we're all worried about saying the wrong thing. But what we need to say is, I understand you. I get it. I know what it feels like too. So let's talk about that. And then let's talk about what type 2 diabetes is and why this is important, because you would like to keep your feet. Oh, this picture every time makes me want babies again, which my husband made sure I couldn't do anymore, but oh God, I would do it again. These are when my twins weren't even quite 1 yet, and we made them little chickens for Halloween. How do we address food holidays? Well, we talk about the food and we do our homework. And instead of just saying, oh, it's Lunar New Year, we should have put something Chinese on the menu or put something, what do they eat? Look at the specific dishes that are important to that holiday and why. Thanksgiving for many Native Americans is a day of mourning and protest, since it commemorates the arrival of settlers in North America and then centuries of oppression and genocide. That doesn't mean you can't still have a Thanksgiving holiday with your family. It just means that let's talk about being together with our family and enjoying a meal together instead of, oh, wait a minute, let's dressing up as the Pilgrims and the Indians and perpetuating certain moments that I'm sure, all can look back on when we were children and say, oh, I didn't realize what we were doing. Well, let's focus on, guess what? Our family really, instead of a turkey, we always made a duck too. We always made a Peking duck because we were Chinese and we were going to celebrate the holiday, but we kind of wanted to eat a Peking duck too. Let's talk about that. And so when we look at food holidays, we also need to think, okay, why are these, what are the foods associated with it, and how do we be respectful? That was a lot, I know. And I added a few slides because as I was going through this, I just really wanted to share more. I know we only really have about 5 minutes for questions. You can always email me. You can always reach out to me, either on the farm Instagram account or on, if you want to send me, a DM. I will have any conversation about any of this at any time. If you are writing a pamphlet and you are like, I'm not sure. If that little hair on the back of your neck is going up, you need to run it by somebody else. That could be me. That could be anybody else. If you start to feel like I'm not quite comfortable with this, guess what? Somebody else isn't either. So run it by somebody else. We're all trying to learn. We are all trying to do better. My first recipe for Eating Well was one that I am embarrassed about now because I did everything that I talk about as being wrong now. But we were doing the best we could, and we are all doing the best we can. So let's continue doing that and continue having this conversation. I'm going to pop over.
Awesome.
Okay.
Great job. I mean, gosh, I think of my own like past, professional cringeworthy moments, just like you experienced too with some of my past roles as a dietitian. But amazing content, such a relevant topic. I just want to quickly jump into a couple of questions if I can. One individual, and I think this is a great quick one to address. She's asking, or he or she is asking, would Mediterranean kind of have that same connotation? So, like, would you not use that? What about like Mexican or Italian? Like what would you recommend on those situations?
Yeah, so Mediterranean one, that's actually, this comes up a lot as well, because when we think of the Mediterranean diet in particular, there's only one set of the Mediterranean that people think of, usually Italy and Greece, but actually there's many subsets of the Mediterranean that goes pretty far north up as well. I think that we have oftentimes it's, well, what is particularly in the dish that makes it Mediterranean? And then from there, instead of just saying Mediterranean salad, yeah, let's actually say what's in it. Mediterranean salad for some will, yes, maybe in my mind, I'm thinking I know what somebody wants to say. Maybe a cucumber, tomato, chickpea salad, but I don't know. And so then we have to lean on those stereotypes of what do I think is the Mediterranean salad? So instead of using that, let's go with actually just saying what's in it. And instead of saying Mediterranean just in itself, use that Mediterranean inspired or Mediterranean style salad.
Honestly, I think that's better advice anyway, because then, someone that may prepare that recipe, they probably want to know a little bit about like what's in it, like use the descriptive terms instead. And that helps kind of keep you out of the weeds there. And I'll try to get to maybe just one more question if I can. This
I'm
person,
going to say it from, sorry, I do want to say, I know that we a lot of times do that from an SEO standpoint of trying to get in like a Mediterranean diet thing. But that's when you can use that head note and to say this Mediterranean, this salad is inspired by the Mediterranean because of this. And then you're still getting in those search terms. Sorry, I just
no, 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 great addition because you're right about that. I mean, I know we're touching dietitians and other healthcare professionals that are working in a lot of settings. So communications and kind of SEO may be really vital to them in their space. So just real quick, I'll kind of wrap it up with this one and then we'll close. So this person's asking, how do you handle foods or customs such as eating raw foods in a respectful or sensitive way? And he or she shares an example of one that kind of like backfired. So what would you do in that situation?
Yeah, I mean, so when you think of food safety, it's how is it being presented? So if we are writing a recipe that is going out to the public and you need to follow USDA guidelines, right? And you need to say cook ground meat to 165. It needs to be written in that way. But if you're just talking to somebody who, by the way, has been eating raw foods their whole life and they eat raw eggs, you can say, and you can lean on the USDA and say, USDA says that we should cook it. But, if that's something that you've been eating, great, eat raw eggs. We eat the cracked eggs, by the way. We sell all of our eggs that are beautiful, and then we eat the cracked ones at home. And my mother's a pathologist, and she thinks that is the craziest thing, and she can't believe that. And we've been doing it for years. And so while she's able to, you can say it, but you can say it in a way that's respectful, like, hey, just an FYI, like, the USDA recommends that you cook this because there's a risk for salmonella. But then you don't demonize somebody because that's something that they've done forever.
Yep. Great point. And I know we're past 2 o'clock here. So thank you all, anyone that's still kind of joining with us right now. But, just want to thank you, Breana, for a wonderful presentation. Obviously, based on some of the comments we're seeing, people really are enjoying this information. And I think it was a great topic to bring to fruition, with this webinar today. You'll see a QR code there on the screen to scan and complete a survey. You'll also receive the survey link in your email later on this afternoon. To sweeten the pot, the first 3 individuals, or just 3 random individuals that do complete the survey, will be randomly selected for a beef swag pack. So we hope to get some really great survey information, on Breana's amazing presentation this afternoon. And just a quick reminder, you'll also receive a link to register for our May webinar, the CEU certificate, and then a couple of additional beef forward resources and so forth as well. So thank you so much for joining us all today. And we hope you have a great afternoon. Thank you again, Breana.
Thanks, Beth.
Take care.
Bye.